They don't respect me. Brutal words from Hamilton about how he's being treated at Ferrari, as revealed in a BBC interview. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Lewis Hamilton's words didn't just resonate. They cracked open a reality that had been building like silent pressure behind the scenes, a narrative suppressed not by accident but by design. When he finally sat down for his interview with the BBC in Monaco, he looked like a man at war with himself. Calm on the surface, collected in posture. But with every sentence, every pause between words, it became painfully clear that what he was about to share was not rehearsed nor sanitized. It wasn't about image management or media diplomacy. It was the result of weeks, maybe months, of psychological attrition. A calculated dismantling of trust, influence, and self-worth inside one of the most legendary institutions in motorsport history. What unfolded during that conversation was far more than a frustrated champion venting. It was a meticulously delivered exposé of internal dynamics that had festered quietly behind Ferrari's glamorous facade, a system that had promised equality and collaboration but delivered hierarchy, favoritism, and subtle marginalization. Hamilton had not joined Ferrari expecting red carpets and constant deference. He joined expecting to build something historic, to fuse his legacy with that of a team yearning for a return to dominance. Instead, what he found was a structure resistant to change, tethered to narratives it was unwilling to let go of, and an internal power dynamic that tilted inexorably toward a single figure, Charles Leclerc. From the moment Hamilton was officially announced as a Ferrari driver, the excitement was palpable. Merchandise sold out, digital engagement skyrocketed, and the aura of Ferrari, combined with the mythos of Hamilton's career, generated a tidal wave of optimism. But inside the team's internal structure, that energy was not matched with institutional openness. Leclerc had been Ferrari's poster child for years, young, talented, emotionally embedded with the Tifosi, and perceived as the rightful heir to Schumacher's shadow. Integrating Hamilton into that ecosystem was always going to be complex, but what Hamilton did not anticipate was how deeply entrenched the prioritization of Leclerc would be, not just on the surface but in the very culture of decision-making, engineering allocations, media briefings, and data feedback loops. The first signs of imbalance were subtle. During pre-season testing, Hamilton noticed that his requests for chassis balance experiments were delayed by several sessions, while Leclerc's suggestions were implemented immediately. Engineers justified it with availability constraints and schedule overlaps, but the pattern continued. Hamilton's feedback in the sim room was often acknowledged but rarely applied without review meetings that dragged on for days. Meanwhile, Leclerc's telemetry concerns were acted upon with near-immediate precision. Hamilton, seasoned as he is, kept quiet at first, attributing the discrepancies to teething problems in a new environment. But as the season began to unfold, the pattern sharpened. By the time the grid landed in Melbourne for the third race of the season, Hamilton's calls for aerodynamic tweaks were openly overridden by the aerodynamic head, who claimed the changes didn't align with the primary feedback loop, a coded phrase that Hamilton would later realize referred to Leclerc's channel of communication with the team's technical director. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The real fracture, however, began to emerge during the European leg of the season, particularly during the high-pressure tripleheader in Austria, Silverstone, and Hungary. At the Red Bull Ring, Hamilton had come into the weekend quietly confident. His side of the garage had prepared an aggressive race simulation strategy that focused on alternate tire stints, leveraging high degradation patterns identified in Thursday's briefings. During the Friday meeting, Hamilton presented a detailed case supported by telemetry simulations, showing that the medium tires would experience significant drop-off after lap 14 due to surface temperatures and the track's low-grip sectors. He recommended a soft-hard combination that would sacrifice early race pace but offer massive gains during the final third. However, during the meeting, Ferrari's strategy team leaned toward Leclerc's preference to start on mediums. Hamilton was told the data would be reviewed again overnight. It never was. The next day, Hamilton discovered that the final strategy document had been distributed to the race engineers without his plan even being included in the alternate scenarios. His race was compromised from lap 10 onward, as tire degradation forced an early pit that threw the entire weekend off balance. And yet, even after Leclerc's strategy proved more effective, Hamilton found himself isolated during the post-race review. His comments were noted but not debated. There was no collaborative breakdown, no whiteboard session to dissect the outcome. Just silence. A signal that his voice, while heard, was not being processed on equal footing. That silence grew louder at Silverstone. If Austria was an oversight, what happened at Hamilton's home race felt more deliberate, more orchestrated. Late in the race, with a safety car neutralizing the field, Hamilton radioed to box for softs. He had studied the lap delta data and knew that a final charge on new tires could vault him up the standings. Instead, the team instructed him to hold track position while pitting Leclerc. On air, Hamilton's response was measured, copy. As always, but beneath those two words was a history of internal conversations, briefings where he had argued for more strategic autonomy, promises that the next time things would be different. They weren't. In the BBC interview, Hamilton revealed what few knew. He had argued the night before the race for the authority to make his own tire call under a late race caution. The team had agreed, verbally. But in the moment that mattered, the agreement evaporated. Leclerc was given priority. Again. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. What made the situation even more incendiary was the way the team framed the outcome to the media. In the official Ferrari press release, Leclerc was praised for maximizing strategic opportunity, while Hamilton's effort was described as solid under changing conditions. One was celebrated. The other was footnoted. This subtle linguistic pattern began to manifest across the season. Team radio compilations heavily featured Leclerc's input. Internal emails highlighting development priorities almost always framed Hamilton's data as supporting analysis. He became a secondary voice in a team that had sold him the vision of a 50-50 partnership. Behind the scenes, some engineers confided in him their discomfort. They had seen requests delayed, parts distributed asymmetrically, and internal chatter around Leclerc's future leadership role that cast a long shadow over Hamilton's presence. Hamilton's BBC interview wasn't a moment of emotional unraveling, it was a calculated turning point. A message, not just to Ferrari, but to the entire paddock. He reminded everyone of who he is, the driver who redefined racecraft in a hybrid era, who built Mercedes into an empire, who transcended sport to become a global icon of social justice, entrepreneurship, and sustainability. He doesn't need Ferrari to validate his legacy, but he had wanted to elevate theirs. He believed in the mythos, in the red suit, in the dream of bringing them back to the pinnacle. What he didn't anticipate was that he would have to fight not only his competitors on track, but his own team for respect. And now, the consequences are unfolding. Sources within Ferrari report increased tension between departments. Some have started to request Hamilton's side of feedback be logged separately in post-race reports. There are even rumors that Leclerc's camp is quietly lobbying to extend his contract under terms that would solidify him as the project leader, a euphemism that would officially push Hamilton into a supporting role. If true, it would represent one of the most brazen internal coups in recent F1 history, and potentially the spark that leads Hamilton to walk away. Not just from Ferrari, but from the sport itself, should he feel that the fight for parity is no longer worth it. When asked during the interview if he had considered leaving, Hamilton's eyes narrowed. "Every day," he said without hesitation. "Not because I'm afraid to fight. I've fought my whole life. But when you realize you're fighting people who are supposed to be standing beside you, it changes the nature of the battle. You stop asking, can we win together? And you start asking, should I even be here?" That's the truth that shook Formula One to its core. Hamilton's words weren't about bitterness. They were about exhaustion. About the weight of expectation and the sting of disappointment. About what happens when greatness is taken for granted, and when legends are asked to serve roles they were never meant to occupy. And in the wake of his honesty, the question now reverberates across every team garage, boardroom, and broadcast studio. If Lewis Hamilton isn't being heard, who is? And what does that silence cost all of us? Behind the glittering surface of Formula One's most iconic team, where red racing suits and prancing horses stir generations of passion, the internal equilibrium is unraveling in ways no press release will admit. Ferrari has always been a dream. For many, it's the apex of motorsport heritage, a team that doesn't just race but embodies the soul of competition. And for Lewis Hamilton, the allure of Ferrari wasn't just about nostalgia, it was a strategic, deeply personal decision. It was about closing his career not with quiet retirement, but with a challenge so vast and difficult it would define his legacy. But as weeks turned into months, what started as a historic union between the most successful driver in Formula One history and the sport's most storied team has begun to rot from within, eroded not by bad luck or poor performance, but by mistrust, silence, and subtle exclusion that cuts deeper than any on-track defeat ever could. Hamilton came to Ferrari with open eyes and a full heart. He knew the culture would be different. He understood the politics would be thick, the expectations crushing. What he didn't anticipate was the slow, disorienting realization that his role might have been misrepresented from the start, not as an equal competitor beside Charles Leclerc, but as a symbol, a figurehead, a branded piece in Ferrari's global marketing puzzle designed to reignite global fan engagement and sell millions in merchandise while quietly reinforcing the idea that the future belongs to someone else. This wasn't just another seat swap. This was supposed to be the story of reinvention, of experience guiding youth, of two titans forging Ferrari's resurrection. But the story that's unfolding behind closed doors feels increasingly like a setup, where the ending was written before the first lap. It started subtly. A missed invitation here. A strategy discrepancy there. A debrief where his inputs were logged but never acted upon. In the beginning, Hamilton assumed it was just the natural adjustment phase. New engineers, new lingo, new workflow. But soon the patterns grew impossible to ignore. After the Spanish Grand Prix, where he battled the car into the points despite balance issues and tire degradation, he requested a one-on-one with Frederic Vasseur. The aim wasn't confrontation, it was clarity. He went in prepared with data, observations, concerns. He spoke directly. He pointed out strategy misalignments, tire choices that didn't match his in-lap feedback, and qualifying decisions that didn't reflect the simulator output. Vasseur listened quietly, nodded, offered vague affirmations. Hamilton walked out thinking, maybe, progress had been made. Then came the silence. No follow-up. No data validation. Just 2 days later, a debrief meeting was held with Leclerc and several senior engineers, one Hamilton wasn't invited to or even told about. The message wasn't verbal. It didn't need to be. It was structural. And it was loud. Within the team, there's been growing talk, whispers in the corridors, side glances in the hospitality suite, radio conversations that get oddly clipped in the post-race analysis. Hamilton is no stranger to internal friction. He's battled it before at McLaren, mastered it at Mercedes. But this feels different. It's not a war of egos or performance. It's a quiet orchestration. A choreography designed to center one driver while another is systematically nudged to the margins. Leclerc, young, fast, charming, and deeply ingrained in the Italian team's DNA, is undeniably talented. And he's earned the admiration of the Scuderia's inner circle. But admiration is turning into favoritism, and favoritism into exclusion. The leak that changed everything came in the form of a casual remark not meant to be heard outside a closed room. Vasseur, in what insiders say was a strategy prep session with Leclerc and senior team members, allegedly said, "You're the face of Ferrari now. Lewis brings legacy, you bring future." It was supposed to be motivational. But in context, it became confirmation of Hamilton's deepest fear, that he wasn't brought in to lead a team but to support a narrative. To elevate the brand while someone else inherited the engineering direction, the strategic investment, the championship ambition. That line reached Hamilton within days, through a whisper from someone who couldn't keep the secret. And when it did, it detonated years of trust in a single sentence. In a private moment, Hamilton reportedly stared at the floor for several minutes before speaking. "So that's what I am now," he said. "A museum piece." On race weekends, the differences have become more than emotional. They're tactical, visible, and undeniable. Leclerc's side of the garage operates like a well-oiled think tank. Engineers circulate ideas constantly, discuss adjustments even between sessions, and pore over data with urgency and creativity. Hamilton's side feels stagnant. Pit strategy is reactive, not proactive. Feedback loops are delayed. Changes are slow, conservative. "It's like we're waiting for someone to give us permission to be competitive," one mechanic reportedly said under anonymity. And it's not just in the garage. In the hospitality area, body language tells the whole story. After Leclerc scores a podium, the room transforms. Glasses clink, people laugh, photos are taken, flags are waved. When Hamilton finishes fourth after executing an aggressive two-stop strategy that defied the initial plan and required surgical tire management, he returns to a few polite nods and a quiet table in the corner. Even his engineers, some of whom followed him from Mercedes at great personal and professional risk, have begun to feel the chill. Requests for data overlays go unanswered. Questions about updates get vague responses. The flow of information feels intentionally narrowed. And while nothing is ever said directly, No orders given, no walls explicitly built. The environment itself becomes a message. You're not the priority. In a team where unity is essential, Hamilton finds himself siloed. Not just physically in the garage, but emotionally, spiritually, in every decision that defines the season. Hamilton has tried to rise above it. He continues to push in the sim, continues to meet with performance staff, continues to give everything in every stint. But the spark is dimming. The joy is harder to find. The hunger remains, but it is now tangled with something he never expected to feel so acutely again: betrayal. Because this wasn't supposed to be the story. Not at this stage in his career. Not after everything he's given to the sport. Not after proving time and again that he isn't just fast, but transformational. And yet, he finds himself staring into the same abyss that claimed so many greats before him. The slow realization that even legends can be written out of the script if they no longer serve the future someone else envisions. And so, behind the gridded smiles and post-race interviews, behind the carefully edited Instagram posts and corporate branding, a fracture grows. One that no sponsor can gloss over, no team principal can spin. Because Lewis Hamilton doesn't need Ferrari to define him. But Ferrari might need to reckon with what happens when it forgets the power of what it has. The world is watching. Not for the next trophy, but for the next move. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that when Hamilton is pushed to the edge, when he feels overlooked, underestimated, boxed in, that's when he changes the game entirely. And perhaps, just perhaps, he's already planning the next revolution. The slow collapse of what once seemed like a promising partnership between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc has become one of the most closely guarded yet widely speculated dramas unfolding behind the polished veneer of the Formula One paddock. When Hamilton announced his surprise move to Ferrari, it was framed as a monumental moment, a legendary driver joining the most iconic team, united by ambition, legacy, and mutual respect. The media called it a fairy tale. The fans called it destiny. The team called it a strategic evolution. And Leclerc, at least publicly, welcomed the move with grace, calling Hamilton a legend of the sport, and saying he looked forward to learning from him. Behind the scenes, however, a very different reality began to take shape almost immediately, one rooted not in respect but in rivalry, not in collaboration but in quiet confrontation. What wasn't apparent at first became clearer race by race, meeting by meeting, interaction by interaction. It wasn't one big explosion, it was dozens of small moments, each of them subtle, precise, and deeply revealing. In the early races, body language said what press conferences wouldn't. In Bahrain, Hamilton approached Leclerc after a long debrief, suggesting they coordinate tire degradation analysis through a shared data overlay. Leclerc smiled, nodded, and never followed up. In Saudi Arabia, during FP2, Hamilton asked his race engineer to compare his throttle traces to Leclerc's entry data at turn 12. The answer came back 2 hours later, delayed, vague, and lacking detail. In Australia, when both drivers gave feedback on rear stability, Hamilton's suggestions were tagged for further analysis, while Leclerc's were implemented in the next simulator session. These things don't happen by accident. Patterns like this, when repeated consistently across departments and race weekends, are often the product of a structural bias, sometimes conscious, often systemic. In Miami, there was a moment off camera that few caught. The two drivers passed each other in the hospitality suite, alone, no press, no PR handlers. A brief glance. No words. No acknowledgement. Just two competitors occupying the same air, and yet worlds apart in intent. That same weekend, Hamilton had requested a more aggressive ERS deployment strategy, only to be told that due to cooling limitations, it wasn't possible. A day later, Leclerc ran that exact configuration in Q3. When Hamilton questioned it, the explanation shifted to evolving track conditions and last-minute calibrations. He didn't push. He didn't argue. But he didn't forget. By the time the European leg of the season arrived, the relationship had deteriorated to a state that could no longer be concealed. In Barcelona, Hamilton asked during a briefing whether slipstream coordination could be shared equally for qualifying runs. The question hung in the air. No one answered immediately. Then, in a tone that was neither sarcastic nor supportive, Leclerc said, "If the timing works, maybe." Hamilton didn't respond. He sat back in his chair, arms folded, watching a team that once fought for every millisecond now split itself across a quiet, growing ideological divide. A divide where one side sought legacy, and the other demanded supremacy. The breaking point wasn't a crash. It wasn't a shouting match. It was in Canada, under gray skies and growing pressure. After a wet qualifying session that saw both drivers fail to reach their optimal sectors due to traffic and tire timing, tensions boiled over. Hamilton walked into the garage, unzipping his suit slowly, his eyes fixed on the telemetry screen. Leclerc, standing just feet away with his helmet still on, reviewed his run with his engineer, voice low but firm. Then came the sentence, casual, cold and calculated, "He's quick, but not in this generation anymore." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even directly addressed to Hamilton. But it was meant to be heard. Hamilton stood there, unmoving, absorbing the moment. "I heard him," he would later say quietly to a trusted confidant. "I didn't say anything. But I heard him. And now I see exactly what this is about." From that point on, Hamilton's demeanor shifted. Not publicly, he remained the consummate professional, smiling at fan events, answering press questions with poise, but internally, the dynamic had changed. He no longer spoke in briefings unless necessary. He began running parallel strategy simulations with his own analyst, a holdover from his Mercedes days. He requested one-on-one sessions with aerodynamicists to go deeper into data, bypassing the usual group reviews. Trust, once assumed, was now something he demanded to be earned again. Then came Monaco, the crown jewel of the calendar. The race where reputation and relationships are magnified under the spotlight of prestige. After a tactically frustrating weekend, where pit stop miscommunication saw Hamilton lose out on undercut potential and finish behind both Leclerc and a rival from a competing team, the internal mood was heavy. That night, during a team dinner at a private restaurant near the Port Hercules harbor, Hamilton made a quiet attempt to clear the air. He brought up the value of collaboration, referencing how, during his time at Mercedes, internal disagreements led to breakthroughs because people talked, listened, adjusted. Leclerc, calmly sipping his wine, looked at him and replied without hesitation, "Maybe we're just not compatible in the way we work." Hamilton didn't respond immediately. He stared at the table, then back at Leclerc, and then quietly but audibly said, "In Mercedes, we had disagreements, but we talked. We compromised. Here, it's like there's a silent code that everything revolves around Charles. And if you challenge that, you're the problem." The room went quiet. No one interjected. The tension was a fog that hung heavy over every fork, every sip, every breath. And from that moment on, Hamilton knew there was no path back to unity. Not in this configuration. Not with this power structure. Since then, the divide has widened. Leclerc is increasingly surrounded by a protective circle within the team. Engineers who've worked with him since his junior days, performance strategists who align with his driving style, executives who see him as the face of Ferrari's future. Hamilton, meanwhile, is operating in the shadows of that machine, bringing his own insights, his own pace, his own mental resilience to a structure not built for him but trying to bend under his weight. And the more it resists, the more focused he becomes. He isn't asking for equality. He's never needed fairness to win. He's preparing quietly for something more potent than internal acceptance. He's preparing to prove, once again, that when the pressure is highest, he rises not because of the system but in spite of it. And now, as the season barrels toward its most critical phases, the friction between the two drivers is no longer a matter of speculation. It is an open secret, whispered across paddocks, analyzed in broadcast booths, dissected in engineering rooms. Team radio clips are parsed for tone. Pit stop timings are studied for bias. Setup choices are debated as potential signs of favoritism. Everything is scrutinized because the stakes are no longer just wins and losses. Their legacy, identity, permanence. Hamilton is no longer trying to coexist. He's trying to reclaim control of a narrative that some in the team thought would shift without him. Leclerc, confident and deeply embedded, continues to execute with precision, believing this is his moment, his team, his chapter. But Hamilton didn't come to Ferrari to be a mentor. He didn't sign on to be a ceremonial figure. He came to win. To rewrite history. To build something no one saw coming. And now, with every lap, every overtaking maneuver, every pointed silence in the garage, he is drawing a new line, not against Leclerc directly, but against the idea that his time has passed. And when the reckoning comes, when the storm finally breaks and the world watches to see who emerges from the fire, not with the fastest car, but with the clearest vision, Hamilton will be ready. Not as a relic of a golden age, but as the architect of a new one. The weight of it all is beginning to crack through the surface, no longer hidden behind press conference smiles or carefully worded soundbites. For months, Lewis Hamilton has maintained the poise of a veteran who's been through enough storms to know how to shield himself from the worst of them. But even he, who has mastered the art of emotional restraint in front of cameras and microphones, is showing signs of erosion. The shoulders that once rolled back with quiet confidence now carry a heaviness visible to those who know what to look for. The stride that once moved with fluid certainty now has a tension in its rhythm, as if every step through the paddock is a negotiation with the burden of staying silent. The interviews are shorter. The eye contact lingers less. The conversations with journalists and engineers alike are clipped, direct, absent of the warmth that once made even his critics feel disarmed. This isn't frustration born from losing a race. This is something deeper. This is betrayal in slow motion. People closest to him have started noticing the shift not just in his mood, but in his behavior. He's still showing up early. He's still putting in the simulator hours. He's still analyzing telemetry late into the night. But the spark, the element that made Lewis Hamilton more than just another supremely talented driver, is flickering. Because effort without acknowledgement is a kind of silent suffering, and what he's enduring now feels like a betrayal of trust more than a failure of performance. Inside the Ferrari garage, a kind of quiet awkwardness has replaced the earlier optimism. The engineers who once greeted him with excitement are cautious now, unsure of how much support to show, how much honesty to offer, as political winds swirl overhead. And Lewis, ever the tactician, is starting to sense the coldness behind the protocol, the calculation in every decision not openly discussed. The initial honeymoon phase with Ferrari was supposed to be about legacy and renewal, two giants joining forces to chase history together. But behind the branding and the optimism was a complicated ecosystem of egos, expectations, and internal loyalties that no one truly warned him about. Or maybe they did, and he chose to believe his presence would be enough to transform it. The reality, however, is turning out to be more isolating than inspiring. Decisions are being made without him. Setups are being prioritized for others. Media strategies are being designed to protect narratives that don't include him at the center. It's not just the public moments, it's the things no one sees. The team meetings that get rescheduled when he's unavailable. The testing feedback that doesn't translate to adjustments. The strategy calls where his input is logged but ignored. The data meetings where silence answers his suggestions. He's still respected, but increasingly, that respect feels ceremonial, not operational. Those around him, advisors, family, a few close friends who've walked this road beside him for years, have started pushing back internally. They've raised red flags. They've reached out quietly to gauge interest from other teams, floating his name not as a bargaining chip, but as a genuine candidate for something different. Aston Martin, with its ambitious trajectory and untapped potential, has emerged as a quiet frontrunner, not because of what they are now, but because of what they're willing to become for someone like him. Lawrence Stroll is no stranger to calculated risks, and the idea of reshaping his team around the most decorated driver in F1 history is more than just attractive. It's an opportunity to cement Aston Martin's status in the sport in one bold move. Conversations are being had, discreetly but seriously. Meetings off the radar. Phone calls using private numbers. Exploratory language that leaves just enough ambiguity to preserve deniability, but also enough intent to make Hamilton feel wanted again. At the same time, other options are being considered, not necessarily for competition, but for evolution. A sabbatical is not off the table. The concept, once dismissed outright, now lingers in the air with the gravity of a real possibility. A year away from the paddock wouldn't mean stepping back, it would mean stepping up elsewhere. Lewis doesn't view time as something to escape, he views it as something to invest. A break from racing would be filled with creation, with business, with advocacy, with the kind of personal expansion he's quietly been building for years. Fashion, film, technology, philanthropy. His team has infrastructure ready. Studio deals, brand launches, global campaigns that only need a signal from him to go full speed. He could disappear from the grid and still dominate headlines for all the right reasons. He could use the time to reshape how athletes transition, how champions rewire their ambition. He doesn't need the sport to stay relevant. The sport needs him. But Lewis isn't someone who makes decisions emotionally, not when it matters most. For now, he's observing, measuring, calculating the moments where things shifted, where the feeling of being essential was replaced with being optional. He's remembering every time his opinion was dismissed, every weekend strategy that felt off, every podium he fought for while others coasted on internal preferences. He's starting to connect dots, not as a victim, but as a visionary. This isn't self-pity. This is pattern recognition. Because if there's one thing Hamilton understands better than anyone in the sport, it's timing. He knows when to push, when to wait, and when to leave. And right now, all signs are telling him to prepare. Prepare for a conversation. Prepare for a pivot. Prepare to choose himself before anyone else can choose for him. And as he sits in the back of the garage, helmet in hand, surrounded by noise but alone in thought, he's beginning to embrace the truth he's been resisting for weeks. That maybe the final chapter with Ferrari won't be written in gold. Maybe it won't be the fairy tale ending the world imagined. Maybe it was never meant to be. And that's okay. Because legacies aren't defined by contracts or press releases. They're defined by conviction. By the courage to walk away from what's familiar when it no longer aligns with your purpose. And Lewis Hamilton's purpose has never been to settle. When the moment comes, and it will, he won't flinch. He'll look it in the eye, just like he did the camera, and remind everyone that he wasn't built in wind tunnels or corporate meetings. He was built in the fire of doubt, in the silence of exclusion, in the grit of survival. He was built to rise. Again and again and again. Whether he's in red, green, black, or no colors at all, he will be heard. He will be seen. And above all, he will be free.